Where's my thing? Okay, well, we're just going to go through the events of the Last Supper. It's just echoing a bit, mate. Can you just turn maybe the foldbacks off or something? Yes, thank you. So the events of the Last Supper are interesting, and Jesus really here describes the essentials of what it means to know God and be in relationship with him during the Last Supper, or the Passover supper. The Passover meal in the Jewish religion was one of 3 annual festivals that the Jewish people would celebrate each year. And the Passover itself was celebrated in the 4th month of the year, and they had a name for that month called Nisan, and it was celebrated on the 14th day of Nisan. And during that same week, it was a week of celebration, they also celebrated the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And this was where bread was not to include leaven, that's why it's called unleavened. And in other words, it's to be flat bread. And this was to symbolise the quick exit they made from Egypt under Moses when God delivered his people, the Hebrews, from slavery. They had to leave quickly, and so they didn't have time for the bread to rise in the oven. So they were told, don't put leaven in it, it's going to be quickly made, and you can eat it on your way. So that was to bring back to their mind that particular time. Also, during this time was the time when the Passover lamb was sacrificed. And again, this was started or instituted during the same exit from Egypt under Moses, where a lamb was sacrificed by each household, and the blood of that lamb was to be painted or spread or sprinkled over the lintel of the doors and on the doorposts of each house. And that blood of the lamb was their protection, because God was judging Israel with Egypt with their final judgment, because they refused to listen to God and listen to Moses. So God was judging them for what they were doing, and the angel of God was to come and bring judgment upon the people. And if whichever Hebrew door had the blood on it, the angel of death would not come to that house. So literally, the blood saved them. And so during the Passover celebration that they were to conduct each year, it was to bring back to their memory this great rescue from Egyptian slavery, which was the beginning of them forming a nation. Later on, Moses gave them the law and the regulations and so on. So even though they were a people in Egypt, they were God's people, but they weren't really a formed, organised people that would worship God. They were just his people, I guess, through descendants and history. But it was only through Moses and the law that they established the proper covenant, all the rules and regulations of what did it mean now to be in relationship with God and truly to be his people. So this was developing. And so they would remember on the Passover the great event of their rescue from Egypt through the Passover lamb being sacrificed and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, the elements of the meal included. So during this meal, there were 4 cups of celebration, so cups of wine. So they'd have 1 cup and they'd keep filling it up 4 times. So there were 4 cups, which was usually mixed with water during that feast. And also they would recite and sing Psalms 113 to Psalms 118 during that time. They also had a sort of, it was like a pasty cement type mortar made of fruit, nuts and vinegar that was mixed together and pounded and made into like a mortar that you would put in between bricks. And again, this was to remind them of the way they used to make the bricks for the Egyptians. They also, of course, had the roasted lamb, and they were to eat that with bitter herbs, the unleavened bread, and they also had a raw vegetable dip. It sounds lovely, doesn't it? I'm feeling hungry right now. They also were, during this time, had various ritual hand washings and prayers. And during the celebration of the Passover meal, at a certain time, the son or one of the sons of the father of the house would say these words: "Why is this night different from other nights?" to the father. And then, of course, I'm glad you asked that, son. And then he would tell them and recite the story of their redemption from Egyptian slavery. What happened on that night, on the time. So he would recite to them the story of Moses and the rescue from Egypt. So these were the elements of the meal that Jesus and his disciples were probably going through during that time. The actual content of that Passover meal and all those things I've just described had developed over the years. It didn't include all those things originally in Exodus, but over time the Jews added some more things to it. And so by the time Jesus was having it with his disciples, it was quite an elaborate feast. And there was an order of service, and they had a Hebrew name for an order of service. So it was done quite, strictly and rigidly, all the elements of the night. And the people who were coming were also reclining. They weren't sitting at a table. They lay down on cushions. And again, this was important and symbolic because it was to symbolise their freedom. They weren't slaves, waiting there for their master to give them orders. They were like, they're the real deal now. They can relax. So, lie down on cushions and eat your meal. Every part of it was symbolic. Now, the 4 cups that they would drink included this. The first cup was called the cup of sanctification. And the verse, they would say, "I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians." After this cup, bitter herbs were eaten, and the history of Israel from Abraham to Moses was recounted, and the first 2 of the Psalm 113, 114 were sung. That was the first cup. Then after, they had the second cup. This was called the cup of plagues or judgments. "I will deliver you from bondage." This cup is served with the meal. So it'd be eating, and they'd have this cup, which the Passover lamb is eaten during this time, and part of the unleavened bread is broken and shared. So they're eating all the goodies in front of them, the Passover lamb and the unleavened bread, and they stop and have this cup to remember the judgment. Then there was a third cup called the cup of redemption, or the cup of blessing. And this went with a verse that says, "I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments." After the meal is eaten, they would drink this cup. The last of the unleavened bread is blessed, broken and eaten, and this cup of blessing is then drunk. And that's the third cup after the meal. Then they had a fourth cup. This was called the cup of praise, or Hallel. And the verse, "Then I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, and you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians." With this cup of celebration, the meal is concluded, and the remaining psalms are then sung. So that's sort of a picture of what probably took place during this Last Supper of Jesus and his disciples. They would have just stuck to the normal thing, but Jesus added some extra things to it, as we know. Now, during Passover week, Jerusalem was an incredibly busy place, bustling. And some say over 200,000 visitors would come to the city. So it was probably not easy to find accommodation and other things. It was filled with pilgrims and merchants, people selling clothes, jewellery, exotic ointments, herbs, fish, sheep and goats. It was also a great opportunity for beggars. Why wouldn't you want to be there if you were a beggar? That's the place to be if you want to get some money out of people and some food. So it was a bustling place. Now, during the day, the afternoon was set aside for the ritual slaughtering of the lamb. The offering of the Passover sacrifices at the temple began around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and was conducted in 3 massive shifts by the priests because, thousands of people were coming in family groups each with their lamb to be sacrificed. So it was a big deal and it took a long time. When the temple court was filled with the first group of offerers, the gates of the court were closed. The ram's horn was sounded and the sacrifice began. Each Jewish person in family lots slaughtered their own lamb. The priests stood in 2 rows, one holding a golden basin and the other a silver one. After the blood was drained into a basin, it was tossed against the base of the altar. While the offerings were going on, the Levites sung the Hallel, Psalms 113 to Psalm 118. Each lamb was then skinned and its fat with kidneys removed for burning on the altar. Before leaving the temple, each offerer slung his lamb wrapped in its hide over his shoulders. So, the innards of the lamb was all burnt up. He would take this lamb over his shoulders back to his house. He then departed with his company, with his people, his family, to prepare the Passover meal. Immediately, the next division of offerers filed in to the temple court and the ritual was repeated. The Passover evening meal was held at home or in a room within the city reserved for the occasion. In the courtyard of the home, the carcass of the lamb with legs unbroken was roasted. It was placed in a clay oven on a skewer of pomegranate wood. Inside the company or the people gathered, festively dressed in white. The room was prepared with floor cushions for reclining and small tables for serving. At the head of the room sat the one leading the ritual meal, usually the father of the house. So you could imagine it was a big, big deal. The overall meaning of the Passover is very clear. Jesus is the fulfillment of the Passover lamb. This ritual, this religious festival that they were doing year after year, and they just do it and do it and do it, now it was coming to an end because the ultimate Lamb of God was now here and he was about to be sacrificed. And they would have this meal after, eat the lamb and have all the other beautiful food after sunset. So imagine that was Thursday when they'd gone to the temple and they'd sacrificed the lamb. During the afternoon they'd take it back and they'd cooked it. And now after sunset they're eating it. So in Jewish thought, as soon as sunset starts, that's the beginning of the new day. And so they're eating this meal during the same day that Jesus is about to die. Make sense? Thursday night in the evening actually is Friday for them. And in a few short hours, soon Jesus will be arrested, tried and crucified in the morning. This great Passover that sat in front of them, this Passover lamb that they were eating in front of, is the ultimate fulfillment of this great Hebrew ritual. And the blood of Jesus saves us from God's judgment. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Jesus will literally become the Passover lamb for all who believe. We also see this amazing extra insight as the story unfolds that reveals this was clearly God's plan. It wasn't an accident. Jesus wasn't caught off guard. The Romans and the Jewish leaders didn't take Jesus by surprise. This was all part of God's plan. And we see that underlined in the way that Jesus tells his disciples to go, Peter and John. When the day came, in verse 7, the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed, Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover. Where do you want us to go to prepare for it?" And he replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you." And apparently men didn't carry jars of water, the women did. "Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room, all furnished. Make preparations there.'" In fact, I think it's Mark's Gospel or Matthew says it was all prepared for the Passover already. So just think of that. Jesus, in his divine nature as God, knows the future. And he looks ahead and he can see this man with a water jar walking along in Jerusalem. He can already see him. And he says, "You're going to go in there and you'll meet this guy and he'll take you to his house, to the room that's already been prepared." Jesus knows this before they even have any idea, because he can see into the future. Amazing. Because God had already prepared this time and this Passover meal that it would be something special that Jesus and his disciples would celebrate. The way that Jesus describes this shows that this was perfectly part of God's plan. It was part of God's foreknowledge and design, showing God's providence. He was providing the place, the time and the occasion for Jesus to celebrate this meal, this special meal with his disciples that we also continue to celebrate today. It underlines the divine plan that Jesus would become for us the Passover lamb. Next, Jesus combines not only the Passover ritual, but also another great event, which was the instigation of the covenant, which came later through Moses. Well, I guess it started with Abraham, but it was developed through Moses. The covenant, the way God and God's people would work together in a relationship, an ongoing relationship. So the first part emphasises the actual act of how people can become right with God and their sins forgiven. Passover lamb. But this second part of it, the covenant, emphasises, well, how are people going to live once they've been forgiven? How are they going to live in relationship with God? What's expected of us and what will God do for us? So then he moves into the covenant, the agreement. And he says it's a new covenant in his blood in verse 20. Sorry, I've got ahead of myself. That's the first part. Now the second part. In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." And as we know, the cup of wine was symbolic of the blood of the new covenant, Jesus' own blood. When a covenant was made, an agreement, like a contract, but more like, a marriage. When a covenant was made, an animal would be sacrificed and the blood of that animal would be sprinkled on the people. It was to symbolise a few things, but mostly it was to say that this is so important that this animal is dying to make sure this covenant comes true. It's like written in blood. It's very, very the ultimate importance of this agreement. And Jesus is saying now, my blood is the new blood of this covenant. This way God and man will work together. I will be your God and you will be my people, is the basis of it. His people will follow God's law and ways, including how we worship God in the new way through Jesus, not in the temple, but through Jesus, who is God's temple. The new covenant is in Jesus' own blood that is shed on the cross for our forgiveness, that we have been made perfect, all our sins forgiven. We are in a right relationship with God, and we can enjoy righteous living before God through faith in Jesus. This is the heart of the new covenant. But it's more than that. The new covenant involves a transformed heart. That God will put his law in our hearts and in our minds. That there will be a new way that God's people will even think about God and feel about God. Really, what this is really pointing to is that the new covenant, the new way God and man will be in relationship, will be completely overwhelmed by the Spirit of God. That he will come and fill each person, and that each person's heart will be transformed to want to love God, want to obey him. We will be not just like the Hebrews whose head had to be always turned back to God. You know, they're always looking after idols and other things and always turn back to him. We won't be like that. The people in the new covenant will have a focus on Jesus because our hearts will love him. We'll be so grateful for what he does because the Spirit of God will live inside of us. The laws will be in our heart. We'll say, what do you want us to do, God, today? It will be a covenant of grace, not works. It'll be a covenant where God will do the work by redeeming us through he will do the work of perfectly obeying the law. Jesus will live a sinless life and obey God perfectly. He's the one who's done all the work to please God. And by faith we're joined to him. And we are seen by God as completely righteous. Like, it's beautiful. It's a covenant of grace where God does all the work. And by faith the Spirit of God lives in us, causing us to live in relationship with him. It's beautiful. This is the new way God will work. The new way you'll be living your life with God. And finally, he talks about a new kingdom. And this comes about as the disciples start asking, well, who will be the greatest in verse 24? Which seems really out of place. It just doesn't seem right. It just sort of comes out of nowhere. Bit of a clanger. But Jesus uses this to really emphasise this third great part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And it's just amazing that during the Last Supper, all these key elements are included in it. He uses this discussion about the greatest to illustrate this wonderful point. In verse 25, Jesus explains to them about greatness. He says, hey, the kings of the Gentiles, well, the way they operate, they lord it over them. They're like master and slave relationship. And those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. This new kingdom is ultimately fulfilled when Jesus returns. He's pointing now to the ultimate fulfillment at the end of time when Jesus comes back, when there'll be another great supper, the marriage supper of the Lamb. where we will be with God forever. He's saying that's when you will, you disciples sit on the 12 tribes judging Israel. You're looking for, I'm conferring on, this is the new kingdom. But it's bigger than just looking forward to that great day, which is our hope. It's also something for the here and now, because he combines that with what it really means to be great. And he's talking about kingdom. He's talking about kings lording it over and ruling, right? So this is the context. He's saying, okay, you've been saved by my blood, I'm the new Passover lamb. You're in now this relationship with God. And now the question is, how do you want me to live to please you once I'm in that relationship with God? I'm going to tell you. You're going to love and serve one another. That's going to be the hallmark of the kingdom of God during this time before you eventually celebrate it with me. During this time, you're not to be ruling over each other, but the evidence that I am your king will be you are serving and loving others. So what that's really saying is the evidence that God is your Lord is that your sin nature, that selfish part of us that wants to do things our way and put ourselves first, that selfish nature is going to be dominated by God. He's going to rule over the sin in us by His Spirit. And that will cause us not to put ourselves first, but to put others first. The real evidence that Jesus is your King is that He rules over you, and that so much you're a changed person as a result of His kingship that we serve others, not ourselves. And Jesus demonstrated this during this Last Supper in one of the other gospel accounts by washing their feet. He took it to such an extreme to emphasise the importance of this way of living in the kingdom, where He pulled up His robe, got a basin, and washed their dirty feet. He was a servant to them. He's saying, just like I am your master and I've washed your feet, if it's good enough for me, it's got to be good enough for you. That's the model of what it means to now live with this God by serving others, by loving. This is the new kingdom, a kingdom of loving service. Greatness in this new kingdom will be shown by humbly putting others' needs first until Jesus comes. So in conclusion, the Last Supper shows us that Jesus became the Passover lamb, the once for all, because people need to know how to get right with God. That's how to get right with God, by believing in Jesus' sacrifice for you. And then secondly, it shows us the new covenant, the forgiveness of sin and the power to live for God. Because people need to know how to live in relationship with God. What's it mean? What is it going to look like when God and I live together? It's going to look like Him doing all the hard work and me being blessed and empowered by His Spirit to serve Him. And finally, because people need to know, well, now that we're in that, God, what do you want me to do? I want you to love one another and serve them. The Last Supper. It's beautiful. It really sums up everything. Let's now eat and drink communion together.